It's Halloween, so on this week's main show, Ed and I looked at some NFL players who have tricks or treats for fantasy football so far this season. Enjoy. So we're going to have a look at the week 8, so we're about halfway now through our fantasy season. Players that we think have been a bit of a trick for us so far, or those that have treated us, and we're basing this sort of on our ADP, also what we're expecting. And as you can see, I've had a lovely couple of days playing around on AI to produce some graphics for us. So some treats from us to come there. But you have got our first pick for a treat, Ed, and a player that has absolutely exceeded all expectation.
Indeed, an absolute treat. And we're starting off with Javonte Williams, got his little jack-o'-lantern pumpkin in his hand there. There are better graphics to come, to be honest. He was drafted, let's remember, as the RB38, behind the likes of, are you ready for this list? Behind the likes of Zach Charbonnet, Brian Robinson, Joe Mixon, and Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, Joe Mixon.
Joe Mixon, yeah, still on the pup list, still yet to take a snap. I mean, looking back, that does look like he was massively going under the radar because he was, I mean, clear RB1, but he looked to be RB1 in Dallas ahead of Jaden Blue and Miles Sanders. But RB38 just seems insane. I mean, did anyone expect him to be RB5 after 8 weeks? Probably not. 9 total touchdowns, averaging 18.6 fantasy points per game, or 18.4 you've got on the slide there. I'll go with you. For someone who you probably drafted for a flex spot at best, is a huge return. There have been no monster weeks, but he's someone who you can reliably plug into your lineup every week and seems to have a very solid floor. So yeah, great season from Javonte Williams so far.
Next up, I'm going to wide receiver and a player that's been an absolute treat for all that drafted him, and also just to watch week in, week out as well. Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Plenty to get our teeth into here, especially when we're looking at the graphic. But he was drafted as the wide receiver 13. And although we saw the year 2 breakout in 2024, finish wide receiver 9, that kind of felt like it's a bit of his ceiling really this year. So at the time, a lot of drafts were going on. We weren't sure what Sam Darnold was going to be this year. We knew that DK Metcalf was going to be there to attract some of that coverage. So although his situation hadn't changed kind of where he is, it had changed a lot around him. But he's averaging 10 targets, 7 receptions, and 117 yards per game, and has 4 touchdowns already this season. He only had 6 across the whole of last season. It looks like we finally have the wide receiver we had hoped would be coming into the league after the 2023 NFL draft. Only had 4 top 12 weeks last year. Already has 5 in 2025, including 3 games over 25 points. So if you drafted JSN, all we can say is what an absolute treat you have had so far. We're going to take our pair of treats to start, though. We're now going to turn to some players we feel we've been a little bit tricked by. And next up, though, Ed, the one treat here is your favourite graphic off the show.
I love it. The AI has done us proud there. But unfortunately, we're looking from the trick lens, and we're looking at TJ Hockenson, a player that, I mean, historically I was very high on. But I became, post-injury, I became, a bit concerned about what he would deliver. He was drafted as tight end 5, and he was someone expected, clearly, to return to maybe not his all-conquering best, but to have a much better 2025 after that horrible injury kept him out for the start of 2024. But he's been a bit part in the Vikings offense, struggling to maintain any consistency, whether it's alongside Carson Wentz or JJ McCarthy. He currently sits at tight end 22 and averaging just 7.9 fantasy points per game. I mean, there's a good chance you might have even dropped him in some of your redraft leagues. He's been that disappointing. Having said that, he's still being started in 47% of leagues, which seems very high for someone who has 2 scores of 10 or more fantasy points and has only managed 1 touchdown all season.
Yeah, it's a player that I think we knew we were taking a bit of a risk on, but it just felt like the situation was right for him, didn't it? And we're not seeing that at all yet. The next player is a player, when the graphic pops up, don't go straight to the comments to tell me I'm an idiot. Just hear me out. So for me, Josh Allen has been a fantasy football trick so far. He hasn't had a bad season. That is definitely not what I'm about to say. He's QB9, QB3 in fantasy points per game, but he's only had 2 top 6 games and has also had a QB17 and a QB25 finish. Yes, he had a good game yesterday. Can't dispute that whatsoever. But it's consistency that you want if you're making a high pick quarterback, especially at the point that you're taking Josh Allen. And if we think about yesterday's game, and yes, you can say if about any sort of point you want to prove when it comes to statistics within sport. But if Ray Davis had got another half yard on his goal line rush, Allen doesn't get the touchdown on the QB sneak. He sits at 77 points and it's a QB 13 finish again. Now we know his rushing touchdowns, his rushing upside is what is part of his appeal. And we can what if all we like. He just seems to get these scattered out throughout. But so if you're drafting a QB in round 2, his ADP was the middle of round 2, so the 206. You absolutely have to be drafting a week in, week out difference maker at the position. And he's simply not been that yet this year. Players around him at the moment, so all above 20 fantasy points per game currently, and kind of we're obviously factoring that bye weeks as well. That's why I'm looking at the fantasy points per game instead of just the actual raw standings. We've got some players that you could have waited till a little bit later for and been just as happy. So Patrick Mahomes, early round 5. Lamar Jackson, the injuries in there as well. He's just above him, late round 2. Dak Prescott, round 10. Jalen Hurts, round 3. Drake May, round 11. Justin Herbert, round 9. Daniel Jones, undrafted as the QB 36 in ADP. So the point I'm trying to make with those players is that if you had taken a punt on half of the starting QBs, you could have had a quarterback that was doing just as good or very slightly worse, and then also had a chance in round 2 at taking Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Ladd McConkey, etc., and had more of a difference maker at that point. So, yeah, please don't think we're trying to say he's having a bad season. Just at his cost, I think we've tricked ourselves into thinking that paying for a top quarterback gets it over the line. Is this a bit of my negative bills coming out, Ed, or am I making a case there?
No, I haven't got any Josh Allen in any leagues because he always went too high. And this is what I feared, that he's not going to get you those kind of massive scores every week, but as you've stated, that you need for him to be that difference maker. So, no, I agree. I mean, Trick might be pushing it slightly, but yeah, I agree that he's been overdrafted, and if you did take him as one of your first picks, then you'll be disappointed.
Let's turn to some treats though again, Ed. And first up, you've got a player that we have loved speaking about over the years.
Yeah, Keenan Allen. I mean, clearly he's a fantasy legend, but his ADP of wide receiver 53 probably seemed fair. You know, he's 33. We weren't sure how the Chargers might fare, and he had big competition from Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston. However, he's currently wide receiver 9, as you can see, with 15 fantasy points per game. And up until this point, although, as we mentioned earlier, that there has been a slight changing of the guard last couple of weeks, he has been Justin Herbert's top target, eclipsing the likes of Johnston and Ladd McConkey. There are signs that kind of his early season consistency may be dropping off. He's thrown in a few bust weeks the last 4 weeks, but he's still probably going to be taking up one of your flex spots at least. His snap percentage this week against the Vikings is a little bit worrying, 25%, but I fully expect him to bounce back against the Titans next week. And so far at this stage, you're certainly very happy with what you've drafted. I think it's unlikely he will have as productive a second half to the season, but even so, considering where he was drafted, you'll be very happy.
Now, for my next pick, we've said with some of the tricks that there have been treat weeks in there as well. So for some of our treat players, we've had some tricks, and I was definitely tricked yesterday by Jake Ferguson, but he has absolutely been a treat for the majority of the season so far. I traded for him yesterday morning in one of our dynasties where I just needed to kind of feel like I was guaranteed that championship run. So I moved away Kyle Pitts for Jake Ferguson yesterday. for a player plus draft pick deal. I was very happy with it.
It did make me laugh.
When I looked this morning, I was going, absolutely perfect. I'm still confident with it moving forward.
Yeah, I think it will be going forward.
It did not work out week one. So Jake Ferguson, absolutely, I was a year too early on the Ferguson breakout. I think I spoke about him as being a borderline my guy character last season. It just didn't happen. And as a result, I don't have much of a redraft last year because that bias crept into me not wanting to draft him. Tight end 1 so far, even with 0 points last night. Only 2 weeks outside of the top 10 tight ends, 7 receptions per game. He was on a 4 touchdown streak until he did nothing yesterday. All from being drafted as a tight end 15 in round 11 or 12. Now, there are several Cowboys we could have included here. Maybe Dak until yesterday as well, but Pickens is in the mix as well for a bit of a treat player when we think about what he's done for us. This is why we've got 2 players in there. But for me, if you've got a player like Jake Ferguson, you absolutely know that you don't have to worry about waivers each week looking for tight ends, as I will do in many leagues if I go for that later tight end pick. Yes, the 0, I'm still plugging in with confidence next week. I'm not worried by that. I think you look at the Cowboys as a whole, that was a bit of an anomalous game where they just came up against the Broncos in the absolute peak of their powers. But Jake Ferguson, drafting him as late as you did at tight end, an absolute treat for fantasy this year, and one that I've been happy to partake in with my trade, regardless of it not going very well yesterday. A player who's tricked us more frequently next, though, when we're moving to the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I mean, we were excited for the Bears in the preseason. We weren't quite sure how things would shake down in the receiver room. However, DJ Moore was the clear wide receiver 1 for the Bears, being drafted as wide receiver 22, far clear of Rome Odunze, who was being drafted as wide receiver 36. However, there's no other way of phrasing it. Moore's had a horrible season, and he's making a real case to be a bust of the season. If you drafted him, then you probably drafted him as someone you could slot into one of your receiver spots, solid floor, and the potential for some big weeks, and not worry about week to week. But he's wide receiver 40. He averages fewer than 10 fantasy points per game. He's had 1 touchdown, and he's also averaging fewer than 4 receptions per game. However, he does have the Bengals next week, so he'll be fine next week. But yeah, I think overall, yeah, you're very, very disappointed if you've drafted DJ Moore. And I mean, question marks have to hang over him from a fantasy perspective going forward, especially with the rise of Rome Odunze.
And our final trick is a player that has completely ghosted us for fantasy since we drafted him, and that is Jameson Williams.
I love it.
For many people thought he was going to have real good value. Even
that image is borderline offensive. I think it looks just ghost-like enough for us to get away with it. But
I did think about that, and I thought Ed won't make a comment that potentially makes this iffy.
No, it's ghost-like enough. I think we're all right.
He has completely ghosted us for fantasy, though, and at the point he was being drafted at, I think everywhere I took him somewhere else, everyone felt they were getting good value of where he was going. And he was poised for that breakout that we're still waiting for. He went off the board as wide receiver 28. So even if he did disappoint, you've not lost a huge amount. But it was going to be tough for him to absolutely let us down. And that's what he's managed to do so far. So wide receiver 12 in week 2, then a 6.3 point week, 5.7 and a 2 point week. Everyone has dropped him. Then an 18 plus point week. Oh, brilliant. We can all plug him in again. Boom, he's in all those lineups. He's tricked us. 2 targets, no receptions, no fantasy points in week 7. So he is, at the minute, the epitome of a trick. He keeps giving us those little glimpses of promise as we're moving through, and then lets us down massively. He's averaging 2.4 receptions a game. So that is the stat that concerns me the most about whether we're going to see this breakout. Like Quentin Johnston, we think last year, he was getting pepper targets and doing nothing with it. In this case, it's not going to happen. And then this year, he's just not dropping it constantly. He's getting on the end of it more. Justin Herbert's finding him in stride better. You can only get the point. You can only catch the ball if you're being past it. And at the minute, he's just not being targeted by Goff enough to have a route to it, is he?
No, I think you're exactly right. He's just way too inconsistent, and you just can't afford that on your fantasy roster. You can't afford someone who could get you 0 fantasy points. That's just not what you need plugging into any of your positions.
So that is the end of our trick or treat. So just a few players for you to think about there. Please do, when you've taken a moment, to subscribe, like, and give us a share. Pop it down to the comments as well. Let us know any players that you think you have been tricked by so far this fantasy season, or anyone that has given you quite the fantasy treats.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.